Salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 217 of the 3 Ps in a Podcast.
I didn't know where to say
Nathan is back.
So did last week, did no one announce that we've made it?
Yeah, we did. I did every time.
Wow.
He said we made it, but
I
I corrected him. I said we all didn't make it.
Yeah.
That is true. Okay, that is
We
true.
were
But
sad
I'm back
about
now.
you being gone.
Nathan's
I'm
back.
now.
But you were on vacation, so we
I
weren't
am.
that sad.
And it was also your birthday, I heard.
It was, yeah, I'm trying to remember when we
Over the
filmed
break.
it.
Did you have a birthday
I
this
had
year?
a birthday
Okay.
over the weekend before my staycation. So
Mm.
that was a good day.
And have you returned to us from your vacation well rested and refreshed and ready to go?
Well, I am well rested, but now I'm realizing my wrist is really hurting, and I don't know if I
Aw.
have somehow agitated it. but
What'd you do?
I don't know, but this morning when I was at the gym, I realized I do not have full. Is it motility? Is that what you?
Mobility.
No, I think
Isn't it?
motility has to do with things floating in water, I think.
Is that what it is?
That would be flotility.
There you go.
I'm
We're gonna
it
look up what the word means. I thought it had to do with range of motion, but maybe that's not.
maybe
I
so.
don't know.
Maybe so. I'm wrong.
Anyway, I've probably been as I learn regularly. I've been using that word incorrectly for a long time, or other things like
many words.
That is not what that word actually means,
yes,
but I
yes.
thought that's what it meant. So regardless, I do not have full range of like that right there hurts, and I don't know why.
It's almost always better to say several words than one that you think is correct.
Really?
I don't have full
So I
range.
just butcher them all.
I don't have full range of motion is what I was trying to say instead of this word that I didn't know what it meant.
There you go.
How did we get on this from talking about your vacation?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember how we jumped on it.
You missed
That's
some
what's
good
on my mind.
episodes.
I have watched parts of. I watched certainly the reel where you guys had
liar,
some.
you did not.
you
watch
Do you
anything.
listen to our podcast?
Oh, I haven't listened. There's only been one that's been on right since.
Maybe.
So I listened to a little bit of it. I didn't
Okay.
listen to all of it. I just wanted to hear what you guys were up to. So
Was it good?
Motility is the ability of an organism to move independently.
So is your wrist an organism?
I don't know. Well, I certainly wouldn't want it moving independently.
That's right.
Using metabolic energy.
I don't know if this is the right term.
No, it does not sound like it is the correct term.
So we screwed that up.
Well, that's not right.
It's okay.
So it's okay. But I do.
Nathan's wrist is
if
hurting.
my wrist started moving
Well, that
independently,
can't be all. There's got to be other ways to use that word because there's a whole thing at University of California, San Diego called gastrointestinal motility, and nobody wants their intestines moving.
Not moving independently.
independently.
Moving on from that topic, it sounds like a personal problem.
yeah.
We have another question.
Okay.
And like I said a few weeks ago, we've had quite a few come in, and I think we're stirring up some questions. So that's good. We are causing more questions than we're answering.
I bet somebody answers motility for us.
No,
I bet they do.
Please
I bet
don't.
somebody
they
that
don't.
knows a lot about it.
I hope they don't.
Do not send in a question.
No, please
like
don't.
that.
No,
Please
an
don't.
answer. Send in an answer.
Oh,
All right. Are y'all ready for this one?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Does the Bible have answers for all of today's moral dilemmas? Is that I have a quick answer for that, but then we have a discussion.
Go, Jason.
My quick answer is no.
There you go.
And
but-
see, my answer is yes.
Okay.
Well,
Wow. Let's get into it then.
I
Ed.
have a feeling though we actually are all saying the same thing.
We might.
This goes back to your original. Why use many words when few words do trick?
That's right. Why say yes or no when we can talk for 25 minutes?
I'll tell you, my wife would have an answer to that. Why did you not just say yes or no when I asked you this question?
true.
She has a reason, which
All
is
right.
we have to actually feed the children at some point.
So do you want me to give my explanation of why I said no?
That's my suggestion.
I think you should.
Okay.
And then he'll
So
say his.
when I read that question, does the Bible have answers to all of today's moral dilemmas? In the sense of, does it spell out for you in black and white, here's how you should solve every single current moral dilemma that we have in such detail that there isn't any ambiguity? Then no.
The answer is no. I agree with that.
Then, because that's the way I read the question.
This person should have used more words.
Well, I'm using more words. And maybe that's not what you meant, but that's the way, when I read the question, that was my first gut reaction to it was, if you're looking for the Bible to answer a specific moral dilemma, and I'm
like abortion.
I was
I was about to say abortion.
because it doesn't even really address that. Now, Are there principles found in Scripture that you can use to solve that moral dilemma? I believe so.
I do too.
But it does not specifically say on the political issue in the United States of Roe versus Wade, here is how you should come down on that. No, it does not answer that question, doesn't intend to.
Right.
Yeah, but there are certainly moral implications
Yes.
to all of these decisions
There
that we
are.
make.
Okay.
So
So I guess the reason I answered the way I did was I think it would be unwise for you to use the Bible in such a way that you think you can find those minute answers in the Bible.
Because particularly if you want a black and white answer,
Yes.
you're going to do violence to
You
what
might.
is written in the Bible.
You just might.
There are lots of things.
Well, and I think a lot of people wind up taking certain parts of the Bible out of context in order to fit their
yes.
current modern moral dilemma. And
Mhm.
that I think is unfortunate. And I wouldn't want you to do that. That's
That's
why I think that's unwise.
I agree with you.
So now back to your
Well,
response.
you said mine too. I think that there are more than enough principles that any moral dilemma you're in, and I thought they originally said all life's problems. The Bible doesn't give you enough indication to figure out how to get to the moon, but that's not a moral
It's
dilemma.
not a moral dilemma.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
right. So if you said how to answer all of life's questions, no, you're probably going to have some math,
Yes.
on some of those kind of things. But when it comes to moral dilemmas, yeah, I think there are enough principles to you that any moral dilemma you find yourself in, you can get to an answer that God is acceptable with. And you would be
Yeah.
on the right side of God. So, for instance, people will say, well, the Bible says you can't lie. But I would be hard pressed to say that the Christians during World War II who
Mhm.
decided to lie to hide people from the Nazis had violated God's law.
I agree.
Yeah,
Because we do have an example of a person named Rahab
Mhm.
who hid some spies,
That's right.
and it was still commanded not to lie, but she hid them and lied.
Yes.
I wish I would remember what it is. I just recently read Howard Thurman, who was an African American preacher in the early 1900s and was a mentor of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he wrote this book that I read of just these series of, I don't know if you'd call them devotionals or not. They're just really thoughts about spiritual life. And he wrote them down and
Mhm.
they're short. And so I read one a day. And I read one the other day and he talks about this exact thing. And I can't remember the way he phrased it because it was so intelligent, so well done. It's not sticking quite in my brain. But basically he talked about, this is my words, not his words,
Okay.
that you have to understand higher authority when it comes to important decisions. And he uses, for example, this notion of an unthoughtful person or a thoughtless person who thinks what God is interested in is here are the 5 black and white commands that you must
Yeah.
always do, would then really struggle with what is the higher law, the higher authority I have to obey when it comes to protecting people who are being unjustly murdered,
Yep.
right? So you could even take the Underground Railroad in our
Mhm.
country's history,
That's
right?
right.
Where there were often preachers and Christians that were hiding people, right?
Yep.
For the sake that the higher law
Mhm.
of acting justly
Mhm.
and loving your neighbor had to presuppose at that point this other law that God gave, which was to be people of honesty and integrity. But the point of being an honest, a person of integrity is so that you could be someone who could love your neighbor.
Mhm.
It's not just because everyone needs to follow this exact letter of the law all the time. And his point is knowing the higher authority actually allows you to be a person who obeys what God. It allows you to be a thoughtful person in new and interesting situations.
Because the way I would see that is there will be times in life where 2 moral, call them laws or principles in the scriptures might very well contradict each other
That was his point.
if taken equally.
Literally. Yeah.
Like you just used that example, Nathan, of the Underground Railroad. But I could also go to the scriptures and say, well, it does say that you should obey the governing authorities.
That's right.
And the governing authorities at that time sanctioned, slavery and
That's right.
racism. So should I have followed that, or do I violate that one in order to, as you said, what I would call the higher law,
Right.
loving neighbor and doing justice?
Or
and
certainly
all those
Christians in ancient Rome or in China right now, or a
Mhm.
place like that where there may be. I just recently read, I think it's from Voice of the Martyrs. They were talking about that either it has become law or it may soon become law that in Chinese churches,
Yeah.
Which there are allowed to be Chinese churches. A lot of people don't know there are
There's
Chinese churches.
There's government sanctioned.
Right. But in order to not be imprisoned, you have to put next to your image of Jesus, you have to put an image of the Chinese
Right.
president.
That's right.
And you must salute him before you sing to Jesus. And that
Mhm.
any preacher that refuses to do that must be imprisoned.
Yeah.
So then that question is,
Mhm.
where's the higher law?
There you go.
And Christians throughout history have gone to, well, the highest law is that Jesus is king.
Yep.
Right. And that's why Paul writes so many letters. You know, he says in Romans 13, and then he says again in Titus like 3 when he talks to them about being good citizens.
Mhm.
And then there's a couple of, I think Peter also makes a reference to living under the authority. The reason they had to write that was because the Christians took it so seriously that Jesus was king
Mhm.
that there were actually these feelings of, well, maybe we don't even have to obey these other people.
Right. That's
And
right.
they're writing to say, hey, where the will of the emperor or the king or the governor or the authorities lines up with something that Jesus would say is good and noble and
Mhm.
right, you should obey those things. But there may come times where the laws themselves are unjust or whatever the thing is, and you have to line, what is the higher law that Jesus is calling me to?
Mhm.
Which always comes back to love
Yep.
and ultimate allegiance to Jesus. And so it allows me to be thoughtful, which then
Mhm.
keeps us, to me, because there's Christians in our country that say, oh, there are certain laws that Jesus is against, so I don't have to follow those laws because X,
Mhm.
Y, Z. And I think about things that have happened recently in our country with Christian nationalism and things along those lines.
Mm.
That also is not being a fully thoughtful person, in my opinion. It is
Yeah.
not a person looking to the higher law of love and not the higher law of Christians should be in charge of everything.
Mhm.
So the way I would think about it morally is Jesus is our ultimate example. So I want to move my life toward being like Jesus. The
Mhm.
highest command that Jesus has is that I love God and love people.
Mhm.
There are other commands that are underneath that I should also look to, assuming that all of those help me love God or love people.
Mhm.
And one of those is honoring the government.
Yes.
But ultimately, I have to just keep walking up the ladder toward becoming like Jesus.
Mhm.
And a part of becoming like Jesus is me giving up my rights. I am ultimately, if it comes to a choice where I am doing something that I can say I can legally do, and I don't know that God would be upset that I do it because there's nothing about it, but it causes me to not be loving toward other people and
Mhm.
mainly serve myself.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
I'm mainly serving myself.
Mhm.
I am not ultimately living the life Jesus calls me to live.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I would.
I was reading a thing talking about reading things the other day, and it's really had a big impact on me in my thinking of what would happen in a really economically consumer-driven economy, which that's all ours is and has been. We went from being a production economy to, once we started shipping things overseas, we had to become a consumer economy because that's what makes the wheels of our business turn. If every Christian, before they bought anything, prayed and asked God, do you want me to buy this? Not can I buy it? Not is it legal to buy it? Not will I enjoy it if I buy it? Not, but like we've been learning to do in our discipleship on mission stuff of, God, what do you want me to see here? What do you want me to hear? What do you, if every now again, I think a lot of people are like, man, that really bogs down the wheels. Well, some of us, the flow of money away from us toward things that are for us might be a little freer than it ought to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
What if every single purchase were preceded by, is this going to move me more toward being with like Jesus?
Mhm.
How would Jesus use my money
Yes.
if Jesus were in my place? Now, that's a tougher kind of call. I'm not saying that I am doing that. I am not.
Well, I think
That is not the way I currently live. But that article really began to cause me to think.
Well, I'm sorry. No, you.
No,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, and are you saying that that way of thinking is the better way to handle when you fall into these moral dilemmas?
I am saying that
Okay.
every moral dilemma, I ought to, the ultimate end of it is, am I loving God more
Mhm.
and loving people?
Mhm.
And if I get to a place that I can't figure that, I think I'll give you the instance that is so much in my mind.
Hmm.
Most people in this country who are Christian, and white Christians particularly, have voted one particular way for a number of years. You talked about the abortion issue. It's
Yeah.
a moral kind of issue.
Mhm.
But we have seen since Roe versus Wade got struck down and states began to want to outlaw that, when it comes down to it, that's not as moral as we thought it was. We don't
No.
really want that. And every politician has known for some time, including the ones that are currently running for president, that in the end, it's the economy, stupid.
Mhm.
If you really want to get people to do something, including Christians,
Yeah.
you will talk to them about how it's affecting their pocketbook.
Sure.
So for Christians,
Mhm. Mhm.
we have been covering up a lot of things with moral. I voted this way because he's going to do this,
Mhm.
and she might do that, or they might do this, and I want Supreme Court justice to strike down Roe versus Wade. Got it done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's done. And then we find out, oh, that wasn't a big deal to us. It wasn't the thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Everybody knows that we vote in national elections around here on. How are we doing on things like how much does it cost at the grocery store?
Yeah.
And how are you personally doing now than you were 4 years ago?
Mhm.
And gas is so much higher. Of course, I still drive everywhere I want to drive.
Mhm.
And I don't ask the hard question of, am I using my money the way that Jesus would use money? If he had control over all the money he flowed toward me, which ultimately he does, because when I die, I guarantee he's getting it back.
I think to the point that you're making here, when you said the thing about covering up a lot of things with morality, I think this is where most of what we consider, and everybody, it's just everyone lives. It's why when we get into these arguments, take politics just for example. People on the right and the left who disagree vehemently about issues both think they are the moral party.
Yes.
They both, because they are telling themselves different stories.
Yes.
They have accepted a different
That's right.
story of the way the world works.
Yep.
This series right now, Jesus Stories, where we've been really using this premise of everyone wants to tell their life a story, wants to do that. A lot of that comes from a philosopher, a Christian ethicist called Stanley Hauerwas, who talks his version of it. He says the American story is I should be able to live the story that I would have chosen to be my story before I ever even had a story. And what he means is my life should not be determined by the circumstances I was born into, whether I'm rich or poor, whatever happened to me when I was a child. Freedom is whatever I want to be or do, I can be or do. And that's the moral equivalent. And so what happens in these situations when we talk about moral dilemmas, people are bringing a story into it, which is whatever I determine is right for me is right. And you can determine what's right for you. But we all know long term, when it comes to decisions that affect these bigger issues, right,
Mhm.
That affect all of us, that's not a effective operational plan. And what the Bible is, by and large, is not the way that many of us were taught to look at it as, I've even heard, I know we've talked about it here, basic instructions before
Yeah,
leaving Earth,
I know.
that it's a rule book.
Mhm.
It's a set of instructions.
Mhm.
It tells you how to do your life. That is not what the Bible is. The Bible
No.
is an alternative story
Mhm.
to what the history of the world is actually about. We've been saying it on Sundays. It's the Jesus story. It's a story that begins and ends and finds its climax with Jesus. And it is telling a story that is a moral story. But the commands, even within them, and we know this when you look at Old Testament commands, or even certain commands that we've talked about in the New Testament where it talks about, I don't let women teach. And people have looked at that and goes, what does that mean? Does that mean women can't ever preach? certain of those things are contextual to the place, but even within that, there are principles you can look at. We've used the term principles because it's part of a bigger story that says, if it's true that there is a good God who made this world to have interactive life with human beings, and if it's true, human beings mess that up, but that God loved us so much, the way he chose to make things right was to begin slowly and personally with a person, then a family, then a nation, then to send himself through that nation to come and live among us, to serve us, and then eventually to die at our hands, to give up his, Ed already said, give up his rights, give up his divine privileges, to die for us, to then raise to a new life and send us out to be the emissaries or ambassadors of that new kind of life. Well, that's a story. That's not now here's the rule. But people who understand that and go, this is the story I'm supposed to live into, can then come to a situation like, how do I handle life in a capitalist society that's consumer driven? How do I handle voting in a democratic republic, which Jesus never had to face? How do I handle issues at a border? How do I handle issues on abortion? These bigger kind of, that all have moral implications. If I brought to it, well, I follow a king who told me my chief thing is to lay down my life and my rights to serve other people. That gives me a moral direction to run after, even though it does not give me a vote yes on Prop 7, whatever it is.
Yeah. Or
handle this particular interaction this way. It gives me a direction to go with relationship with this God.
And I feel like a lot of what you're saying, Nathan, is leading towards something that I don't think most of us Americans like to hear. And it is, when it comes to moral dilemmas like this, if you find yourself in one of those and you truly are seeking after that, more than looking for a Bible verse, I need to look to my community.
That's good.
Because what you're just describing, you don't do that in a isolated box.
No.
You do that in the context of a family that is doing life
and
with Jesus together, centered around the story of Jesus, to try and figure out, because everything is not cut and dried, easy, black or white, whatever you want to say. It is, this is something that the Bible doesn't say plainly, but we've got all this other stuff over here. How do we as a community work for the ways of Jesus in this world? And in some instances, it may be this thing over here. In others, or in a different time and place, it may be over here. For example, there may be a time where I do need to advocate for a particular law in society to get some things done that ought to be done. But there may be a time when I don't. And I go over here to the people that it affects. I actually work in their lives to bring about love and peace and justice. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal.
It's one of the huge benefits of living in our country is we do have options that other Christians haven't had through the ages and still don't have most places. Is I can decide to use the government for the benefit of Jesus.
Right.
But I have to be aware that the government is always trying to use me. That our culture, the more I entangle myself, the chance of me, the attraction of power is unbelievable.
Yes.
And power for a follower of Jesus is always supposed to be given up for the benefit of others. Whatever power I have, I give it up to serve others. And it's really attractive to try to gain it to make people do things.
Well,
So I go back to there is a story. Use your analogy or using the story that we've been using. There is a story, there is a plot, and I have to find myself in the plot. And the main character in the story is Jesus. It's a unified story leading to Jesus. And even what's happening right now through Christians is supposed to be leading to Jesus. So I have to constantly be moving my life toward that, which is ultimately I'm going to love God. I'm going to love people. I'm going to give my rights up the way that he did. You used a phrase before we came on. It's centered set. A lot of people see, again, I know you don't know this phrase, but there's a view of Christianity that says we are a bounded set.
We're defined by our boundaries.
That's right.
Rather than
Everybody inside this set, if you say that you have faith in Jesus, no matter, you can bump right up to the boundary and you're all in. But the way we understand, I'm going to say we,
Yes.
the three of us and our church, is that Christianity is moving toward a person. It's about following Jesus, and it's a centered set. All of us are coming from different places, but we are moving to the same point.
That's right.
We may be further out. And the truth is, we don't know where Jesus set the boundary on who is out there, and that ain't our job.
No.
That is not our job to say who's on the edge and who's not on the edge.
Yeah.
Our job is to say, this is the way of Jesus. Jesus is walking this way. So I can say to people in front of me who I think are off track a little bit, hey, I think you're off track. Doesn't mean you're not following Jesus, but this is the way. And and people behind me can correct me, and I can correct people behind me. I can do all of those things, but I'm always pointing that direction. So I think that's why I say, I think it can solve every dilemma as long as you don't think in terms of bounded set thinking is there's a rule.
Yes.
There's a rule. And if I can figure out a way to make a rule, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It ain't there.
It's not a rule, it's a person.
It's a person.
And he is king.
And I think if the goal is interactive life with God, and this goes even to the thing of the rule behind it. We are in these a group in our church called On Mission, where we're trying to live out the mission daily in these groups, and part of that is really learning how I need to surrender my will to God's will. But even in that, there becomes almost a robotic way of that happens, where everyone thinks God's going to divinely implant an idea into Jason's head, and then he can't do anything until someone implants that idea. But what God's interested in is thoughtful relationship with creatures. We say cooperate our lives. And what I often hear people say that is, Jesus, take the wheel. And what that means is, I don't want to operate anything anymore, which is not cooperating. That's just God operating in life. Like I'm a mindless drone. What God is interested in is creating thoughtful people who can interact with him and with others in his character and likeness. That takes formation. That takes time. It takes a community. It takes the story of God. It takes all of these different elements. And it takes me, surrendering my will, because I have to become aware. That's what I like about the example of the article Ed said he read of praying before. All of us have been primarily formed in a world that has told me my number one job is to get enough money that I can consume and not have to worry about it. Consume as much as I can. And even those of us who are believers who have, been raised to tithe and to be generous, it still seeps into us. Because what I then go to is, because this is the way that, because I grew up with the 10-10-80 plan, as we call it. So what I just started teaching myself from a young age is I don't have 100%, I have 90%, and then I have 80%. Well, that's just another version of 100%. I'm just taking, it's like taxes, because no one looks at their paycheck and goes, those taxes that got taken out before I ever even got the paycheck, I'm living off this paycheck, not the money that I got. There's a way in which even looking at that and being thoughtless. Now I go, I've taken care of it. I don't have to be thoughtful about the rest of it. There is a discipline, and my family actually started doing that last year, because I just felt very convicted of when we would go out for luxury kind of things. We're just going to pray, and we're just going to say, God, thank you that we have the ability to do this. And if there are other times, teach us where we might need to not make these kind of purchases. Teach us to see where we might need to be more generous with something. And it does, not in that particular, I never got a God go, leave the restaurant. This is not time for you. What it did was it slowly formed me into the kind of person that before I made purchases, I considered maybe God had other things for this. Well, that's a practice, a discipline that allows me to become the kind of thoughtful person that when a moral dilemma is in front of me, I don't have to sit and contemplate what is the higher law.
Yeah.
I know it in the morning. The example that we use in ours all the time is the time when Jesus is at a synagogue and a man with a withered hand comes in on a Sabbath, and the religious leaders, and he asks to be healed. And the religious leaders at the time are in this higher law thing.
Yeah,
Is the Sabbath the higher law, or is healing someone the higher law? Jesus immediately goes, I know what my Father's up. We would heal this man. The Sabbath ain't the higher law. This is the higher law. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath.
Well, and because he knows that, he's able to also point out their hypocrisy of
Correct.
you care more about your animal than you do for this brother.
That's right.
That's right.
And it's also how he talks to the woman that you taught on a few weeks ago, the Syrophoenician woman who comes
Correct.
to him,
Mhm.
and she's a Gentile. He knows he was sent to the Jews. He's already said that kind of thing. But because he knows what faith in God looks like when she presents
Right.
Oh
it.
yes.
And he knows that's what his Father ultimately has the plan for.
Mhm.
He knows there's nothing wrong here. Timetable's not the deal here.
Mm-mm.
That's
right.
not where we're
Mm-mm.
working. So because he knows that so well,
Mm.
he's able to do that kind of thing. And that's why I get back to, I think there is, but we've already pointed it all out.
We have.
Jesus is a way, but community, I wouldn't have said that in the beginning. I know it, but
Yeah,
it
that's a
really
good point.
is a huge part of it that
Yes.
Jason wound up bringing up, that we really should discuss this stuff more in community.
Yes.
I was thinking about the money thing, and I hadn't thought of it in regard to that article, but all three of us know of a guy named John Mark Comer, and he has been living, and he's written books now, which I
Mhm.
assume have done pretty well. I mean, at least he got money from me, and he has been making decisions in community with a few other people since he was in college. He doesn't spend any money,
Yeah.
hasn't ever in his life, that is not made in community with these three really
Yes.
close friends. Their families all agreed to it. That's the way they live.
Mm.
I'm not sure that's not. I'm not saying that's a rule. I'm not saying everybody.
no.
Because once
I'm
again,
not
it's about
saying.
being
That's
thoughtful.
right.
I'm not
That's
saying.
right.
But I can see where it came. You look at the Book of Acts, and everybody's
Yes.
they're submitting everything. They're just they're bringing everything to the apostle. Let's all take care of each other.
Mm.
Anyway,
But that's
Yeah,
a part,
that's right.
even all of those things are part of the story. The community is part of the story.
That's
because
right.
I become a person who is not fully independent. I become the kind of person who goes, I am in this thing with other people. And so even when I have to make moral decisions, those are not private moral decisions.
Mm-mm.
I go to brothers and sisters in Christ and I say, hey, this is what I'm facing.
Yep.
Or here's what we as a community, I think a lot about when the pandemic hit and when there were all these moral questions of, do you shut down? Do you wear masks? When do you open? When do these kind of things? Those were unprecedented for our times.
Yep.
Not for all time, but for our times.
And what the right decision wasn't this. I'll just say this. The right decision wasn't as important to me as how we went about making the decisions that we
Yes.
decided were right.
That's right.
I think people could wind up at different places
Yes.
and still be within the will of God
Mhm.
if the way they went about the decision.
That's right.
When somebody said to me, the government's not going to tell me what to do, that's not the right way to go at
That's
that
right.
decision.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, that may be down there a little bit after you've determined that what the government wanted you to do was wrong, but you don't shorthand it that way.
That's right.
You know,
Yes.
that's not a good way for a child of the king to make decisions.
And that seems like a great place to end because you just hit such a controversial. So, all right. Well, Nathan, we're glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back.
Yep. And that's why we probably went over. We added a third more.
That
of a
is
voice.
what it is.
So,
That's what
but
it
I'm gonna
is.
cut this off. So, if you have more questions of that nature, or as I was telling these guys before, I think we probably stir up more questions when we talk sometimes.
Yes.
But that's okay because
Yeah.
that's what we're in process of doing.
We
is
want you to be
figuring all this.
thoughtful about
Be
listening to this.
thoughtful. That's right. So if you have another question of that sort, send it in to us. Link is in the description, and we'll do our best to tackle that and stir up more questions about your questions
And about motility.
and motility,
Oh, wow.
whatever the heck that is.
Yes.
See you next week.